Steve, thanks so much for hopping on the podcast with me today, man. I appreciate it. This has been a long time coming. We've been talking about it for a while, so glad it can happen.
Yeah,
Yeah, if you could tell us a little bit about who you are and your ministry and your podcast.
absolutely. Yeah. I'm Steve Cullum. I'm the student pastor at LifeBridge Christian Church in Longmont, Colorado. And I've been here for just a little over 4 years at this point. And I have a wife named Yvette. We've been married almost 13 years. And I'm also the Colorado coordinator for the National Network of Youth Ministries. And I host the Student Ministry podcast.
Very cool. Very cool, man. So with this issue, we're talking about the importance of awareness when it comes to the context and structure of our ministry. I think being part of National Network, you and I probably heard the same numbers about how the average tenure of youth pastor has gone up, but it's not very high. And so when we move around a lot, especially people in our field, it might kind of be turned upside down. Like, is everything the same here? Or we do things the same and it doesn't work out. And we're like, why isn't this working? So we need to make sure our ministry strategies, content, and even presentation lines up with the context of our students. So Steve, let's start from the beginning for you. Can you tell us about your youth ministry journey and the different roles that you've taken in different spots over the years?
Yeah, absolutely. So I grew up in the church. So pretty much maybe a year or two when I was like in elementary school, I didn't go as much, but for the most part, I grew up in church and mostly went with my grandparents. And so I saw their example from a very young age of serving within the church. And later on in my life, I realized that one of my grandfathers, my dad's dad, was actually the volunteer youth group leader in his church. And so it was kind of in my blood, but I really didn't know it at that point. But yeah, everybody in my family volunteered in the church, but no one actually was employed by the church. And so that's the kind of example that I saw. And so I knew that that's what I wanted to do. But it wasn't until I got into high school and I started specifically volunteering within kids ministry and student ministry, being invited by my own youth pastor, and just really fell in love with what was possible. Loved working with the younger kids, loved working with my peers as well, and just really God started speaking to me and realized that's something that I could be doing in the future, not simply in a volunteer role, but also to explore the idea of vocational ministry.
Yeah.
And so yeah, that's what I went to college for, with the idea of going into vocational ministry. And so I got my bachelor's degree in youth ministry from Lincoln Christian University in Lincoln, Illinois, and immediately started volunteering within youth groups there, not only in the local church, but also we had an outreach, a high school outreach ministry on campus that was run by the college students. And so started volunteering with that, and eventually stepped into leading that ministry my junior and senior years. And also got involved in a part-time ministry that was like about a half an hour from campus. And so I did the whole weekend warrior thing and drive over to, do youth group and church and everything. And then we also had Wednesday night middle school ministry at that church. So I was also back and forth on a Wednesday night, just driving back and forth to campus every week and doing that for a while. I was full-time in the summer. That was an awesome thing. And then it was a very small church, rural church, but they offered to bring me on full-time for the summer. So that was really cool. And did some internships and residency ministry within Illinois. And that's where I got a lot of my feet wet, just diving into a bunch of different opportunities. So all the way from volunteer to full-time and everything in between. And went to seminary as well at Lincoln. And that was a really great experience for me to just further that education. My master's degree is focused in youth and family counseling. And so just really felt that was something God was shaping me to where we could be able to use those skills and everything within student ministry as well. And throughout that time, I took 3 different mission trips out to New England. And it it was the first time that I'd ever been in that part of the country, and honestly fell in love with what the culture was out there, and the possible ministry opportunities, and all those things. And so lo and behold, when I was finishing up my seminary classes, there was a few churches that were looking for youth pastors. And so I applied at a few of them, and became the student pastor at Rockingham Christian Church in Salem, New Hampshire, which is just across the border of New Hampshire and Massachusetts. So about a half an hour or so outside of Boston. And so kind of the Boston suburbs. And I was the first youth pastor there in a new church plant. I was like 4 years old or something when I came on board. And I got to build that ministry up from the ground up, and be able to go through all the hard times of starting a student ministry, but also I was there for 10 years and got to see a lot of the growth and some really cool stuff over that time. And then about at the 10-year mark, God started stirring in my heart to that there might be something next, and then moved my wife and me out to Colorado. And I've been here for 4 years in a completely different church, a church that it started in 1891. So the church in New Hampshire was started in 2001. This was 1891. So
a little bit of a difference there. Yeah,
just a bit. So there's been a lot of different experiences over the years. From size of church to the age of the church to the location, all those different things.
Very cool, man. Wow. That's quite the gambit of things. I feel like you and I have some similarities there, from in high school feeling like, okay, maybe this is what I'm going to do. And I had internships take me to Florida and doing stuff in California and other things. And then I've been here in Texas. That's really cool. There's a lot that you've seen, volunteer as the guy. So we have an overview. We have Illinois, we have college, seminary, we have New Hampshire, basically Boston area. And now we have Colorado. And as you mentioned, those are very different places, especially Colorado from where you spent the last decade. So what stands out to you as the biggest shifts you've had to make ministry wise, especially once you came to Colorado?
Yeah. The funny thing is that I've started in 3 different areas of the country, 5 different churches and in significant roles, from volunteer to full time. And in all those changes, the move from Illinois to New Hampshire was the biggest. Not only was I new in ministry, but it was going from, for the most part, rural Illinois to Boston suburbs. So very different. If people are unfamiliar with the Northeast, it's statistically the most unchurched area of the country.
Oh, wow.
And so going from the middle of the Bible Belt all the way out to the most unchurched area of the country was pretty big. And I had to learn a lot through those times. And I thought, actually, when God started stirring my heart for Colorado, I had always had this picture in my mind that Colorado was also back in the Bible Belt. And honestly, I had grown such a huge heart for the unchurched right before I moved to New England and throughout my time there, that I kind of fought God a little bit with it, because I didn't want to go back to the Bible Belt. I wanted to stick with unchurched people. I wanted to be in a place where I didn't find people that go to church all the time. And so the idea that I had in my mind of what Colorado was actually based mostly on a certain area of Colorado, mostly Colorado Springs. And which is really the only place that I've been.
Yeah. Christian Mecca of the West.
Exactly. But after doing some research, I realized that's not the case at all. The rest of Colorado is also very unchurched. And doing some further research, where God was going to be moving me to here in Longmont is in Boulder County. So right next to Boulder, Colorado, and also one of the most unchurched areas of the country. And really started getting excited about that. So the change actually from Boston to here, there's some significant changes, but it wasn't as huge. But there's still some like pieces of the Midwest, and there's some pieces of everywhere, because Colorado is one of those places that everybody's moving to. I think similar applied to Texas. Like you
Definitely
have people from
Texas.
all over.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So
Especially
we have
North
people
Texas.
from Texas.
Yeah.
But we have people from Colorado. We have people from Illinois. We have people from the East Coast, all the way from, the southern states. And so all of those cultures coming together, I guess it really told me like I have to be on my toes like all the time. I have to constantly be doing research. It wasn't enough to just do some research like in the beginning and go, okay, I know what Colorado is, because it's constantly changing. And I think that's one of the biggest things is that sticks out to me, is that I'm constantly having to learn. I'm constantly having to go back and like, okay, there's a new culture I need to learn because there's a new influx of people from California, or there's new influx of people from Texas or whatever. Okay, and need to learn that culture a little bit more as well. One of the things that stood out to me as well is that this part of Colorado, a lot of Colorado as a whole, but this specific area is about 30 to 35% Latino as well. And so that was a brand new thing for me, to be able to now, like, how do I speak into that culture, and how do I reach that culture?
Yeah.
And so, so making a lot of new friends that are Latino, asking them a lot of questions along the way. So just, I think that's part of it, as well. And just silly things like Boulder area is full of a lot of like hipster kind of culture and outdoorsy culture here in Colorado. And so, that's different as well. So before, in the Boston suburbs, like we had certain things that we'd always do with the students that seemed to work well. But here it's like, oh, okay, you would totally be fine just going on a hike. We don't have to go down into the city. In fact, they don't prefer going down to Denver. It's a lot easier to say, hey, let's go on a hike, or let's go, camping or something like that, where the students in the Boston area would be like, I want to go out in the city. I want to do stuff in the city. So there's similar things there, but also very, very different. And I think one of the biggest things that within the church world is that there are similarities to both the Northeast and the Midwest here in Colorado. And so it's a little bit of the both worlds that I've been in before that, where there are a lot of people that are very turned off by the church. Either they're unchurched or dechurched, or there's people on the other side of things that are very much in the church, grew up in their whole entire life, and have those kind of expectations. So I'm constantly, I guess, surrounded by people that are on both sides of that, and trying to figure out, like, how do we reach those parents specifically? Students are pretty similar, but it's a lot of the parents that when we work with them, it's like, okay, you have a very, very unchurched kind of mindset, and you over here have a very, very, very churched mindset that your family's been to church for the last 10 decades. And how do we reach both populations at the same time?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Wow, man. That's a lot to consider. And I feel like probably our generation is really the first to be, like, kind of our heads out of the sand, like, oh, I need to be constantly surveying the landscape and seeing how things changed. And one of the benefits, well, one of the positive things that came out of COVID was that all of us had to hit the reset button, not just like a suggestion. You had to do it to survive as a ministry. But things that aren't as, global pandemic-y as COVID, things in, like, even if you're in the same place for a while, you have to kind of say, okay, things are different, things are changing. How am I going to adapt? Sounds like Colorado is a place like that. Texas overall, but certainly North Texas is definitely like that, for sure. So I'm from Phoenix, and shortly after I moved here back in 2009, sometime in the year or two after that, I think Phoenix officially hit 51% Hispanic. Um, and being here in Dallas, when people think of Dallas, not so much the TV show, that's like a generation ago or two, but people probably think of Dallas as the Dallas Cowboys and money and whatever else. And you would usually stereotypically associate that with Caucasian white people. When I moved here in 2009, I was told that Dallas County is only 25% white.
Wow.
And the longer I've lived here, especially now that I live just north of Dallas, I'm basically in Dallas. It's the first suburb across of a loop highway, Richardson. So diverse, incredibly diverse. The nations are in your backyard. So many refugees, especially the biggest pocket group of Nepali people outside of Nepal live in the Dallas area. There's just so much here, rich diversity, and it definitely has you doing more than just the generational. How are different ages and generations being affected by technology? You have to consider the area and their context and their schools. Because of that, you can imagine how the public schools look very different. And some schools within the same ISD or district, or even semi-close regionally, many of them look a lot different than each other, just because it's, that's just how it is. And it definitely has to keep us on our toes. So, I feel like without doing the cross-country moves or big, huge paradigm shifting moves, kind of like it sounds you have done, what do you feel like keeps youth pastors and youth workers from not being able to succeed long-term in ministry? Do you feel like it's just because they kind of stop learning and stop observing? Or do you feel like it's something else? Because I feel like when you were talking about that, I'm like, I feel like this might be kind of more widespread than just hey, you've moved. What's different? It sounds like it's more in the ministry fabric than we might think.
Yeah. I think, I've pondered that question for a long time, because I value longevity in ministry. In fact, before I came and right after I came to LifeBridge, I was asked several times, how long are you planning on staying here? And that question was actually rooted in the fact that like there was a lot of turnover before me. So oddly enough, our church, and it's like 128 or whatever, 129 years, has had, I think, 5 or 6 different senior pastors over that time. So huge longevity.
Wow.
But probably about 5 or 6 different youth pastors before I came, within the last like the 10 to 12 years before I came.
Yeah. Sounds about right.
Yeah. And so it was definitely that was the context I was stepping into. And I had to tell them, I was like, I don't know, the mind of God. I don't know how long God's going to want me here, but I'm going to be here as long as he wants me here. And my track record is I was at my last church for 10 years. And because I view longevity, my youth pastor was at his church for like 35 years. And so like, that's always been a question in my mind, like, okay, why? I have this idea of longevity. I talk with other people that they value it, but why is the national average so low?
Yeah.
Like why is that the case? And I think some of it is on the churches. I think either not valuing youth pastors very much, or not paying them what they need to, or all those different things definitely factor into it. But I think a lot of it is just not being able to, or not being willing to just stay on top of your game. I'm actually reading through coincidentally, you asked me to talk about adapting ministry, and I'm reading through the book Canoeing the Mountains right now, and all about adaptive ministry. And I think we have to be on top of our game all the time. I've been asked, of course, like I'm sure you have, and so many other youth pastors out there, what do you do during the week? What is your job? And I've told them like a good portion of what I do is research. not just research into the Bible, but research into culture, research into youth culture, research into our community, the things that are happening around us, trying to figure out what's working, what's not working, because we have to stay on top of our game. If we're not, then we're going to be trying the same games that worked 20 years ago or 10 years ago that are not working in this context, whether that be a different church, whether that be a different youth group. I mean, we do have the, like we have that turnover, that natural turnover. If we have all things well, we have a kid for, like 7 years. But most of the time that's not happening. We're turning them over every 3 or 4 years probably. And so like the population is always changing. Generations are always changing. And so if we're not staying on top of that, we could easily say, oh, I don't work anymore in this. What I know is not working. And so therefore I don't fit in this context. And sometimes that might be accurate. That person may not fit that context anymore, but I think a lot of it could be overcome if we just have the mindset of trying to research, trying to figure out, always asking questions and being able to adapt on the fly.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Always asking questions. I've appreciated that perspective more and more. Like you, writing for youth specialties and having to like look up things and think about how we think about ministry. And, the smartest people have always told me, never assume you're the smartest person in the room. Always look to learn from someone around you. And that intellectual approach of humility is so valuable, because I've learned so much just from people's stories and from their experiences, and God showing and awakening things in me through what I'm seeing in their life. Coming into Colorado, you've had all these years of ministry and building a program from the ground up. And there were times, I'm sure, where you're like, you know what, I need to hang back and let you take the lead because you have history with this family or this context, and I need to learn, right? And that kind of approach is what's needed. We need to be able to empower and delegate and really take advantage of who's around us and build them up as much as we're trying to build the ministry. That goes into
Absolutely.
volunteer training, that goes into making sure that the youth ministry vision isn't a silo. It's basically a subset and our support of the church vision. It needs to be just keeping things in perspective and keeping the students' idea of church and what's healthy and growing the main thing. And that's the gospel, and the gospel never changes. And contexts of culture and culture itself and multi-cultures, they change all the time. And what's trendy now is trendy for, days. And when we were growing up, it was like a month or 2 months or whatever. And we just have to be, you're right. Use your words, on top of your game all the time. And that can be exhausting. And that's where we need good boundaries, margins, soul care. And that's another conversation. But so let's expand this a little bit and give some takeaways for people who are watching and listening. So based on your own experience, maybe even adding in what you've heard and learned through talking with people on your podcast, what do you think are the most helpful things to remember if you want to make your youth ministry adaptable and prime for longevity?
Yeah, I think I think one of the big things is make sure you're doing your research all the time. If you're going to a new area, honestly, Wikipedia is a huge thing. I just spent some time on Wikipedia before I moved, and I'm constantly talking to a lot of our students and saying, "Oh, did you know this about our town?" And they're like, "No, I had no idea." You know more about my town than I do, and I've lived here my whole life. It's because I read the Wikipedia article. It wasn't that difficult. So, like, as simple as it is, like just go to your city's Wikipedia and learn some history about the area that you live in. Spend an hour reading, and you're gonna definitely benefit from that. And with that, you can also connect then with the kids' parents and and even older generations within your church as well. Like if you're going to be able to connect and grow your team, you want all different generations serving within the student ministry. Like the more you know about that area, the more you can connect with those different generations, the better. So constantly be doing your research, not only on youth culture, which, like you said, is changing by the minute. Sometimes one meme that's like really hilarious. One meme at a time. Like, that's right. Done. You're like, you could use one in a sermon, and all of a sudden they're like, dude, that was like, that's dumb. That was like 2 weeks old. Really?
Such a letdown.
Just that fast. But then on the other side of things, learning about your culture and stuff. So I'd say never stop researching, but especially when you're going into a new context, spend some time, act like you're a missionary there. If you were going into a completely different country, you would need to do your homework on the culture, the people, the language, all those different things. I realized that there was a lot of different language when I moved to New Hampshire, that some of the other parts of the world don't use those words. And so I had to learn those. And then moving to Colorado, I'm like, okay, which of these words still translate there and which ones do not? Like, do they call soft drinks soda or pop? Do they, all these different things, like, cause you don't want to seem like that weird guy. They're like, oh, okay, he uses this other word. Like you want to connect with the culture that you're going in. So simple things, but also some more significant things. The other thing I would say is, we've already alluded to, is ask a lot of questions. Constantly be asking questions of people that are other youth pastors in the area as you're networking with them. Like especially people that have been there a little longer than you. Hey, what's worked? What hasn't worked? Because you're reaching, for the most part, the same population of people. So network with them, ask a lot of questions, but also ask questions of the people within your church, within the people on staff, within the people on your volunteer team. I had the huge benefit of having some people that I inherited, some volunteer leaders that I inherited here that had been serving in student ministry, specifically at our church, for like 30 plus years.
Wow.
And just a wealth of amazing information. And so we went out to coffee and we went out to lunch frequently. I'm like, okay, what's worked? What hasn't worked? What have you seen over the years? And not that you would just replicate all those things, but it's things to just put, just to file away and like, oh, this worked one time, but it's not going to work this time. And there's some context there, and like constantly be asking questions to those people, not just when you first come in, but like, I don't know, like if you ever have anybody like that, make it a regular coffee or regular conversation that you're having with those people.
Definitely.
Just, don't discount their experience and everything as well. And I'd say, like, as far as coming into a new culture, a new church, new context, several of my mentors told me this, and I'm very grateful that I learned this at a young age. When you're going into a new context, don't change anything within the first like 6 to 12 months.
Yes.
Like you may think like, okay, all these things worked amazingly at my last church. And you may just be moving across town, but you don't necessarily know if those things are going to work at this church just like they did before. Plus, you may run a lot of people off in the process. So spend that first at least 6 months, if not the first 12 months, just learning a lot. Try some things out, experiment, but don't make any drastic changes because contexts are different. Even if it is just across town and not across country. Yeah.
Oh, definitely, man. Definitely. That's actually the first article I wrote for Youth Specialties, is 3 things to do in your first year. And that was the big one, is keep consistency, because you are already different. And so if you come in and you start changing things, their entire world is upside down. But if you come in and everything basically is the same, you are the only change that they have to navigate. And once they see you, learn about you, and believe in you, then they'll come behind the vision that you eventually have and things that you start changing. But yeah, consistency, especially among the high turnover rate for people in youth ministry, that has to be the first thing for sure. Very cool. Well, Steve, man, this has been fun. Thank you for coming on here. I hope to have you back again. If you could tell our listeners where they can keep up with you and connect with you online.
Sure. Yeah. Probably the best place is my website and blog. It's stevecullum.com. So that's STEVECULLUM. I'm on most of the social medias at Steve Cullum, and my podcast can also be found on pretty much all the podcast services out there, but there's also a link on stevecullum.com. So that's probably the easiest place is just to head right over there.
Yeah, perfect. And we'll have all that info in the YouTube description and in the show notes. But dude, thanks again. I'll be praying for you as you continue learning about the changing context of Colorado, but also just ministry as we keep investing in these students. Thanks again, bro.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thanks for having me.
Well, that does it for today's episode. Thanks so much for watching. All the contact information and everything else our guest shared about getting to know them and their ministry more is in the YouTube video description below. If you haven't already, please give our video a like. And at the end of this video, there'll be a spot right here to watch our last video and a spot right here to subscribe to our YouTube channel if you haven't already. Also below, there's a link to our website, youthministrymaverick.com. You can listen to all of our episodes, get some merch to help support the podcast. You can see a list of organizations that are there to help you in your ministry, see some articles that I've written, and some other things. I hope to see you back here on Friday for the next fantastic Friday 5. And until then, thanks for watching. Adios.